Picture this: Sunday brunch, cozy farmhouse-style dining table, mimosas, fluffy pancakes, the whole Instagram-worthy setup. My mother-in-law is in full hostess mode, smiling at guests, playing the perfect matriarch. I'm quietly putting some fruit on my plate, minding my own business, when she leans toward the lady sitting next to her and says in the loudest whisper you've ever heard, loud enough for the entire table to catch every single word. "Ever since my son married, we've had a financial burden to carry." Then she looks directly at me and adds with that fake, sweet smile, "Some people just take and never bring anything to the table." The entire room goes silent. Forks stop midair. Some people look at me with pity, others awkwardly cough, trying to mask the tension. And me? I just sit there, gripping my water glass, feeling my throat tighten and my eyes burn. But inside my head, there's only one thought echoing. Financial burden? Auntie, that $3.7 million house you so proudly show off to guests, giving them tours of every corner like you're some real estate queen? The title deed that just got printed yesterday has a new owner's name on it. And spoiler alert, it's mine, not yours. Want to know what happened next? Well, she served scrambled eggs with a side of public humiliation that morning. But just a few weeks later, when the real estate lawyer sat in their living room, spread out the purchase papers, and calmly announced that their $3.7 million house was now officially in my name, let me tell you, her eyes were glued to the floor more than her plate ever was. Stick around, because this story gets absolutely wild. Let me take you back a bit so you understand the full picture. From day one of my marriage, my mother-in-law had this pattern, this constant narrative she loved repeating. "My son provides, you just exist." That was her favorite line. At family gatherings, she'd casually drop comments like, "We don't really know what she does all day," or "She spends, he earns." Even though the reality was the complete opposite, she painted this picture where her son was Atlas holding up the world, and I was just some decorative burden hanging off his shoulders. But here's the thing nobody bothered to check. I'm not some unemployed freeloader living off anyone's generosity. I work in a high-earning field. I've got my own successful business that I've been running for years. Even before marriage, I had solid savings, investments, a portfolio that would make most people's jaws drop. My husband, he's great, I love him, but financially speaking, he's got an average income. Nothing wrong with that, but his mother had this delusion that the universe revolved around her beta and his paycheck. Now, let's talk about their house, this beautiful property in an upscale area, valued at around $3.7 million. It was their dream home, their pride, their everything. But what guests didn't see was the hidden pressure. Retirement was approaching fast. The mortgage, property taxes, maintenance costs, they were all piling up. Their finances were getting tighter by the month. Behind closed doors, there were these quiet conversations, these worried whispers about, "We might have to sell one day." But publicly, never. They'd rather die than admit they were struggling. So here's the irony that kept me up at night. To them, I was the minus sign on their Excel sheet, the financial burden dragging them down. But they couldn't see, or maybe they refused to see, that the person they were treating like a parasite was the exact same person who would end up securing their entire future, saving their beloved roof over their heads. They saw me as the problem when I was actually going to become their solution. That Sunday brunch wasn't just another family gathering. It was the moment everything crystallized for me. They'd invited relatives, friends, the whole social circle. Conversation was flowing, mimosas were being refilled, and somehow the topic shifted to finances. You know how it goes. Someone mentions the cost of living, retirement planning, medical expenses, all those heavy adult topics. One of the aunts, trying to be sweet, said to their in-laws, "At least your kids will take care of you when you're older." That's when it happened. My mother-in-law let out this performative sigh, the kind she wanted everyone to notice her struggle, and said loud and clear, "My son does everything. Ever since he married, we've had an extra financial burden to deal with." Then she turned, looked in my direction, and drove the knife deeper. Some people just don't understand money. They spend and expect others to catch them when they fall. The table went dead silent. My husband shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Someone tried to change the subject, talking about the weather or sports or anything else, but the damage was done. Those words hung in the air like toxic smoke. I felt my throat close up. My eyes started burning with tears I refused to let fall. But I just sat there, folding my napkins slowly, mechanically, keeping my hands busy so I wouldn't shake. Inside my head, though, I was screaming. You want to publicly brand me as a parasite? You want to serve me up as the family freeloader in front of everyone? Fine, but what you don't know, what you can't even begin to imagine, is that in just a few weeks, I'm going to buy your entire house. Not with his son's money, not with some loan or favor, with my own accounts, my own earnings, my own power. And when that title deed gets signed, when those papers become official, you're going to realize just how wrong you were about who the burden really is. The idea didn't come out of nowhere. A few months before that brunch, I'd started doing some research on the real estate market. It's something I do regularly as part of my investment strategy. I analyze neighborhoods, property values, market trends, and during one of those deep dives, I noticed their area. Stable market, property values appreciating steadily, good long-term investment potential. Around the same time, I started picking up on their stress, little comments here and there. My father-in-law mentioning property tax increases, my mother-in-law complaining about repair costs, overheard phone calls about retirement funds not stretching as far as they had hoped. They were trying to keep it quiet, maintain appearances, but the cracks were showing. That's when I had the thought, they're eventually going to have to sell this house, either to some random investor who flip it, or to a buyer who guts the place and rebuilds. They'll lose their family home, their comfort zone, everything. But what if there was another option? What if I bought it? Not as some revenge plot initially, just as a strategic move. I secure a solid investment property, they get the cash they need for retirement, and the house stays in the family. Win-win, right? I started planning. First decision was structure. Should I buy it through an LLC, keep my identity hidden until the last moment for maximum impact, or put it directly in my name, clean and clear? I went with a trust setup initially, which allowed me to make the offer without them immediately knowing it was me. The offer itself was calculated, market realistic, full price territory. I wanted them to get the best possible deal, no lowballing, no games. This wasn't about cheating them financially, this was about showing them exactly who they'd been underestimating. I sat down with my husband and laid it all out. Depending on your marriage dynamic, this conversation could go different ways. In my case, I was transparent. I told him, I'm buying your parents' house. This is happening with or without your blessing, but I'd rather have your support. He was shocked, obviously, but after I explained the numbers, the logic, the fact that his parents would actually benefit from this, he came around. The in-laws, meanwhile, had no clue. All they knew was that their real estate agent had found an interested investor, some buyer who was serious, had financing ready, wanted to close quickly. They were relieved, honestly. The pressure was lifting. They'd be able to retire comfortably, travel, enjoy their lives without the constant worry of that massive mortgage hanging over their heads. But here's what kept me going through all the paperwork, all the inspections, all the legal processes. They thought I was a burden. They thought I brought nothing to the table. Meanwhile, the cash, the approvals, the signatures moving through the background, that was all me. Every single dollar that was about to secure their retirement, save their beloved roof over their heads, came from the woman they called a financial drain. The irony was thick, you could cut it with a knife. Once the offer was accepted and we moved into closing phase, I had one specific goal: make sure the reveal happens in the most undeniable, unavoidable way possible. I wanted the truth to hit them like a freight train in their own house, surrounded by official documents and witnesses. No room for denial, no space for excuses. I coordinated with the real estate agent and the lawyer, told them exactly what I wanted, scheduled the final closing meeting at the house itself, frame it as a buyer introduction and document signing session, make it feel formal but comfortable, like they're meeting the new owner over tea and paperwork. My mother-in-law loved that idea. She probably imagined some wealthy, older couple, maybe successful business owners, people she could show off to one last time before handing over the keys. The strategy was surgical. The agent would arrive first, set up the documents on their dining table, then the lawyer would come, brief everyone on the process, and finally the doorbell would ring. "That must be the buyer," someone would say. My mother-in-law would rush to the door, full hostess mode activated, ready to greet these mysterious investors who were taking her beloved home. Except when she opened that door, it wouldn't be strangers, it would be me, standing there, calm, professional, holding my file folder, looking her directly in the eyes. And in that exact moment, everything she thought she knew about me, every assumption she'd made, every insult she'd thrown, would shatter like glass. I rehearsed my approach mentally 100 times. No gloating, no sarcasm, just calm, respectful professionalism. Let the facts speak for themselves. Let the signed documents, the purchase price, the transfer of title do all the talking. The twist would drop at the precise moment when the agent said, "Let me introduce you to the buyer." That's when her world would flip upside down. I kept thinking about that dining table where she'd served her public humiliation with the scrambled eggs, that same living room where she'd painted me as the family burden. In just a few weeks, I'd be walking into that exact space, not as the broke daughter-in-law she imagined, but as the new owner of her $3.7 million property. The woman she'd underestimated was about to become her landlord, and that thought, I won't lie, it kept me smiling through every document I had to sign. Closing day finally arrived. Their living room was set up perfectly. In-laws sitting on the couch, my husband next to me looking slightly nervous, the real estate agent arranging papers on the coffee table, and the lawyer reviewing documents with that serious professional expression. My mother-in-law was slightly overdressed. You could tell she'd put effort into her appearance. She was anxious but excited, probably imagining what these mysterious buyers would be like. She'd even prepared refreshments. Cups were ready, cookies arranged on a plate. She was in full performance mode, ready to be the gracious seller, the dignified matriarch passing on her family home to worthy successors. She kept glancing at the door, checking her watch, adjusting her hair. Then it happened. The doorbell rang. The agent looked up casually and said, "That should be the buyer now." My mother-in-law practically jumped up, smoothing her dress, putting on her best smile. She walked to the door with this energy, this anticipation. You could see her mentally preparing her greeting, her little speech about the house's history. She opened the door and froze, completely froze, because standing there, file in hand, dressed professionally, calm as anything, was me. Her face went through about 17 different emotions in 2 seconds. Confusion, shock, disbelief, anger, all mixing together into this expression I'll never forget. "What are you doing here?" she managed to say, her voice cracking slightly. The agent, completely oblivious to the family drama, responded cheerfully, "Perfect, everyone's here now. So, as you know, this is the buyer of the property. Today we'll finalize the $3.7 million purchase and go over any remaining questions." The room went silent. You could hear a pin drop. My father-in-law looked like someone had just told him gravity stopped working. My husband had this small, supportive smile. He knew what was coming. But my mother-in-law, she just stood there, mouth slightly open, unable to process what was happening. I walked in calmly and said in the most measured, professional tone I could manage, "Apne hamesha kahatha ke ye ghar aapki greatest asset hai. Main agree karti hu. That's exactly why I thought this asset should stay within the family." I paused, let that sink in, then added with just the slightest edge, "And since I'm apparently a financial burden, I figured I should take that burden upon myself." The agent, bless his clueless heart, started spreading out the papers, purchase agreement, title transfer documents, disclosure forms, and there it was, printed in official legal text, my name as the buyer, the purchase price $3.7 million, right there in black and white. Those numbers became real in front of her eyes. This wasn't a joke, wasn't a misunderstanding. This was legal, binding, official reality. My mother-in-law sank back onto the couch, still staring at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. The lawyer began explaining the process, asking if there were any questions, going through the standard closing protocol. But I could see her mind was somewhere else entirely, trying to reconcile the daughter-in-law she'd dismissed as worthless with the woman who just bought her house outright. After the papers were signed and the agent and lawyer left, there was this heavy silence. My father-in-law excused himself, probably unable to handle the tension. My husband squeezed my hand and gave me a look that said, "You've got this," before also stepping away. That left me and her sitting across from each other in what was now technically my property. She finally spoke, and her voice was shaking with anger and humiliation. "You went behind my back. You made me look like a complete fool in front of everyone. If you had this kind of money, why were you living off my son this entire time?" The accusations came pouring out, all the defense mechanisms kicking in, trying to make me the villain in her story. I took a breath and responded calmly. "मैं कभी आपके बेटा पे या आपके पैसों पे नहीं जी रही थी. आपने assume कर लिया क्योंकि आपको मेरी actual story जानने में interest ही नहीं था. आपने decide कर लिया कि मैं क्या हूँ without ever asking me." I kept my voice steady, not aggressive, just firm and clear. "That Sunday brunch, you called me a financial burden. In front of your entire social circle, you labeled me as someone who takes and never gives. You chose that label without knowing a single fact about my finances, my work, my contributions. I could feel emotion rising, but I pushed it down, stayed focused. What happened today wasn't revenge, it was reality catching up. I bought your house at full market rate. Your retirement is now secure. The property you love stays in the family. I didn't cheat you, didn't trick you, didn't do anything except show you the truth you refused to see." I leaned forward slightly, making sure she heard every word. "But here's what changes from today. You will not insult me about finances ever again. You don't have to like me, you don't have to approve of me, that's completely fine. But you will not treat me like a parasite, a burden, or a gold digger. Wo narrative aaj khatam ho gaya." I stood up, smoothed my jacket, and prepared to leave. She sat there silent, probably for the first time in years not having a quick comeback, not having some cutting remark ready. The power dynamic had shifted completely and irreversibly. I wasn't the one begging for acceptance anymore. I wasn't the one who needed to prove my worth. That chapter was over. So let me tell you what I learned from this whole situation, and why I'm sharing this story with all of you. People who call you a financial burden, who dismiss your worth, who underestimate your capabilities, they're usually working from assumption, not information. They don't have your spreadsheets, they don't know your accounts, they don't see the full picture of your life. They just make judgments based on their own biases and limitations. And here's the thing about self-respect. Being kind doesn't mean you have to hide your worth when someone repeatedly tries to diminish you. It doesn't mean you stay silent while people publicly humiliate you. Sometimes the most powerful response isn't an argument or a confrontation. Sometimes it's simply letting your actions, your achievements, your undeniable reality speak for themselves. There's this quote I love. "Never let someone who has done nothing tell you how to do anything." My mother-in-law spent years telling me I brought nothing to the table, while sitting at a table I could have bought and sold multiple times over. The disconnect was stunning. So if you're in a situation where people underestimate you, where family or friends or anyone treats you like you're less than you are, remember this: you don't owe anyone your financial statements. You don't owe anyone proof of your worth, but you also don't have to accept their false narrative. Set your boundaries, protect your dignity, and when the time is right, let the truth reveal itself in ways they can't deny. My mother-in-law called me a financial burden on Sunday brunch, served with scrambled eggs and public humiliation. But when she saw that closing table, when she saw my name on those $3.7 million purchase documents, one thing became crystal clear. I wasn't her son's burden, I was her house's new owner. And that's not revenge, that's just reality finally getting a seat at the table. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button, subscribe for more real-life payback stories, and drop a comment telling me what you would have done in my situation. Because sometimes the best comeback isn't what you say, it's what you do. And trust me, a signed deed speaks louder than any words ever could.
precision, timing, and impact. I sat at my table, finished my drink, and made a decision. I was going to reveal the truth, not as a brag, but as a correction. I was going to show everyone, especially my cousin, that their assumptions about me were not just wrong, they were laughably wrong. But I wasn't going to do it clumsily. I was going to wait for the perfect moment, the moment when the irony would hit hardest. My plan was simple but surgical. I would stay low profile for the rest of the evening. I wouldn't engage in arguments or defend myself verbally. Instead, I'd wait for the conversation to naturally circle back to housing, real estate, or future plans. And when it did, I'd make one calm, undeniable move that would flip the entire narrative. First, I prepared the tools I needed. I had my mansion keys with me, a heavy set attached to a distinct keychain with a smart gate fob that clearly looked high-end. On my phone, I had recent photos and videos of the mansion, interior shots of the living room with floor-to-ceiling windows, the pool lit up at night, the driveway with luxury landscaping, and an aerial view that showed the sheer size of the property. I also had a screenshot from a real estate app showing the property's estimated value, hovering around $5.6 million. If anyone doubted me, I could show them proof instantly. Emotionally, I was calm. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. I told myself, he made a joke out of your dignity in front of a room full of people. You're not going to scream or argue. You're just going to place the keys on the table, show the truth, and let reality do the rest. There's a certain power in silence, in letting facts speak louder than words, and I was ready to wield that power. Later in the evening, after most people had finished dancing and were settling back into their seats, the conversation at one of the main tables shifted to future plans and home ownership. The bride and groom were talking excitedly about the condo they had just purchased, their first home together. Relatives congratulated them, shared advice, and talked about their own experiences buying houses. It was a warm, celebratory conversation. Then, one of my uncles turned to me and asked casually, "So, what about you? Any plans to get your own place soon?" It was an innocent question, no malice behind it. But before I could answer, my cousin, who had been hovering nearby, jumped in with his trademark smirk. He said loudly, "Please, he practically lives out of a suitcase, let's be real." He laughed, and a few people chuckled nervously. Then he added, "We'll all pitch in for a sleeping bag as a wedding gift someday." More laughter. The attention of the entire table shifted to me. People looked at me with that familiar mix of pity and awkwardness. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I calmly set my glass down on the table. The sound of it touching the surface felt louder than it should have, like the room had suddenly gone quiet. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my key ring, a heavy set of keys with a distinctive mansion gate fob attached. I placed them on the table in front of me. The metallic jingle echoed in the space. People's eyes followed the movement. My cousin stopped mid-laugh, his expression shifting from smug confidence to confusion. I looked up, my voice steady and calm, and said, "You're right. It was getting hard bouncing between places. That's why I finally decided to settle in one spot. 8 bedrooms, infinity pool, home office, private garden. Last valuation on Zillow was about $5.6 million. The table went silent. You could hear a pin drop. I pulled out my phone, opened my photo gallery, and passed it to the person sitting closest to me. That's the front entrance. That's the pool at night. That's the master bedroom. The phone was passed around the table. People's eyes widened as they looked at the images. Someone whispered, "Is this really your place?" I nodded. Bought and paid for. My cousin's face went through a series of changes: confusion, disbelief, embarrassment, and finally forced laughter as he tried to save face. He said, "Oh, come on, stop joking. You're messing with us." But one of my aunts, who had just looked at the photos, shook her head and said, "No, this is real. I recognize this neighborhood. This is one of the most expensive areas in the city." Another relative pulled out their phone and quickly searched the property online, confirming the valuation. The mood at the table shifted entirely. People who had been laughing at me moments ago were now congratulating me, asking questions, expressing genuine surprise and respect. My uncle said, "Why didn't you ever tell us?" I smiled slightly and replied, "Because I didn't need to." My home is real whether people know it or not. Then I turned to my cousin, looked him directly in the eye, and said calmly, "So, next time you call someone basically homeless, make sure they don't have $5.6 million worth of front door keys in their pocket." The silence that followed was deafening. My cousin tried to laugh it off, but his face was red, his confidence shattered. A few people awkwardly tried to change the subject, but the damage was done. The narrative had flipped. I wasn't the struggling relative anymore. I was the one who had quietly built an empire while everyone else was busy making assumptions. After the reception ended and guests were starting to leave, my cousin found me near the parking lot. His expression was a mix of anger, embarrassment, and forced casualness. He walked up to me and said, "Okay, seriously, why did you have to flex like that? You made me look stupid in front of everyone." I stopped and turned to face him, my expression calm but firm. I said, "I made you look stupid? You spent the entire evening calling me basically homeless in front of a room full of people. You didn't just make a joke, you orchestrated a public humiliation. You wanted everyone to see me as less than you." He tried to deflect, his voice defensive. "It was just a joke. You're too sensitive. You could have told me privately about your place instead of embarrassing me like that." I shook my head. "You didn't deserve a private correction. For years, you've made punchlines out of my situation. You've mocked me at every family gathering, made assumptions about my life, and treated me like I was beneath you. Tonight, I just corrected the record. If the truth embarrassed you, the problem isn't the truth. The problem is your behavior." He looked away, clearly uncomfortable. He tried one more angle. "Everyone's going to think I'm a terrible person now." I replied, my voice steady, "Then maybe you should stop acting like one. You don't get to publicly disrespect someone and then demand privacy when the truth comes out. You made my housing situation your content. You made my life your joke. I just showed everyone that your punchline was based on ignorance and arrogance." I took a step closer, not in a threatening way, but to make sure he understood the weight of my words. "From this point forward, my housing, my income, my life, none of it is material for your entertainment. If you want to joke around, joke about yourself. I'm not your free content anymore. I'm not your punching bag, and I'm definitely not someone you get to underestimate ever again."
I didn't notice him at first. That's the strange part. If something truly doesn't belong, you'd think it would stand out immediately. But it didn't. It blended in, quietly. The flight was already delayed by nearly an hour. Snow had been falling since early evening, thick enough to coat the windows of the terminal and mute the noise outside. By the time boarding finally started, most people were tired, irritated, and ready to sit down and disappear into their seats. I was flying home after a 3-day work trip. Nothing exciting. Just meetings, cheap hotel coffee, and long days. All I wanted was to get home, shower, and sleep in my own bed. I boarded with Group C and found my seat near the middle of the plane. Economy. Aisle seat. Seat 18C, the row was empty when I arrived. I put my backpack under the seat in front of me and sat down. The cabin lights were still bright. People were shuffling past, bumping elbows, apologizing without really meaning it. The usual. I remember thinking the plane felt quieter than normal. Not silent, but muted. Like everyone was already half asleep. I pulled out my phone and checked the time. We were still waiting on a few passengers. That's when the man sat down next to me. I didn't see him arrive. One moment the seat was empty. The next he was there, already buckled in, facing forward. He was maybe late 30s or early 40s, clean-shaven, dark jacket, nothing unusual, no smell of alcohol, no nervous energy, just still. I glanced over instinctively, the way you do when someone takes the seat beside you. He didn't look back. His hands were folded neatly in his lap. No phone, no book, no earbuds. Just sitting, staring straight ahead at the back of the seat in front of him. "Long night," I said casually, mostly out of politeness. No response. I assumed he didn't hear me or didn't feel like talking. Fair enough. I turned back to my phone. A few minutes later, the flight attendant walked down the aisle doing a final head count. She stopped briefly at our row, glanced down, then continued without saying anything. Nothing strange about that. The plane pushed back from the gate. The lights dimmed slightly. Engines hummed louder. I leaned back and closed my eyes. That's when I realized something felt off. The man next to me hadn't moved once. Not when the plane started taxiing. Not when the safety video began. Not even when the seatbelt sign chimed on. Most people shift, adjust, cross their legs. He didn't. I opened my eyes and looked again. Still the same position, still staring forward. I noticed something else then. There was nothing under the seat in front of him. No bag, no backpack. No jacket stuffed down by his feet. That's unusual but not impossible. Maybe he checked everything. The safety demonstration ended. The flight attendant came by to check seatbelts. She paused at our row again. She looked at me, then at the empty tray table, then moved on. She didn't look at him. I told myself I was overthinking it. Takeoff was rough. The plane shook through the clouds, turbulence rattling the overhead bins. I gripped the armrest without realizing it. The man beside me didn't react at all. No tightening of his hands, no shift in posture, nothing. We leveled off. Cabin lights dimmed further. The soft glow of overhead panels replaced the brightness. Most people around us started settling in, headphones on, eyes closed. The drink cart came through about 20 minutes later. The flight attendant stopped at my row. "Something to drink?" she asked me. "Water, please." She handed me a cup. Then she paused, looking at the seat beside me. "Sir," she said, slightly louder. The man didn't respond. She frowned slightly, glanced down the aisle, then moved on without taking an order. I watched her walk away, my stomach tightening. Maybe he was asleep, but his eyes were open. I took a slow sip of water and tried not to stare. A few minutes passed. Then I heard him breathe. It wasn't loud, just deep and slow. Controlled, like someone pretending to sleep while staying very awake. I shifted in my seat, uncomfortable now. I could feel his presence more than see it. The space beside me felt heavy. I pulled my phone out again, mostly to avoid looking at him. No service, of course. I locked the screen and slid it back into my pocket. That's when he turned his head. Slowly, just enough to look at me. His eyes were dark, focused. Not angry, not friendly, just empty. He didn't blink. We locked eyes for maybe 2 seconds. Then he turned back to face forward. My heart was pounding now. I told myself to relax. People are weird on planes. Some don't talk, some don't move. But this felt different. When the meal service came, small snack bags and drinks, the same thing happened. The flight attendant handed me a bag of pretzels. She skipped him, didn't even acknowledge his existence. I waited for her to leave before leaning slightly toward the aisle. "Excuse me," I said quietly to another attendant passing by. "I think the guy next to me didn't get anything." She looked at the empty seat. "I'm sorry." "The passenger next to me," I said, pointing. She frowned, glanced at the row, then at her tablet. "There's no one assigned to that seat." My mouth went dry. "He's sitting right there," I said. She followed my finger. Her eyes lingered for a moment. Then she looked back at me, confused. "Sir," she said slowly, "that seat is empty." I turned. The seat beside me was empty. The man was gone, no movement, no sound, just gone. I stared at the seatbelt, still buckled. The indentation on the cushion was still there. My heart was racing now. I must have looked pale because the attendant asked if I was feeling okay. I nodded, didn't trust my voice. She walked away. I sat frozen, staring at the empty space beside me for the rest of the flight. When we landed, everyone stood up, grabbing bags, crowding the aisle. No one stepped out of that seat. No one brushed past me from that row. I waited until the plane was almost empty before standing. As I reached for my backpack, I noticed something on the seat next to me, a folded boarding pass. I picked it up with shaking hands. The name was smudged, hard to read. The seat number was clear, 18B. I handed it to the gate agent as I exited. She looked at it, then at her screen. "That seat was never scanned," she said. "Then how did he get on the plane?" I asked. She didn't answer. She just threw the boarding pass away. I didn't sleep that night. Sometimes, when I'm on a plane now, I still feel like someone is sitting next to me, quiet, unmoving in a seat that doesn't exist. The woman in the window seat kept checking her watch. At first, I thought she was just nervous about flying. Some people do that, look at the time every few minutes like it might somehow speed things up. But after a while, it started to feel desperate. This was a late-night flight, just after midnight. A short domestic trip that should have taken less than 2 hours. The cabin lights were dim, most passengers already half asleep, wrapped in hoodies and blankets. I was in the aisle seat, she was at the window. The middle seat between us was empty. That should have felt like a small comfort. Instead, it felt like a space waiting to be filled. She wore a light gray coat, too thin for the season. Her hair was pulled back, slightly messy, like she'd rushed to the airport. No headphones, no phone in her hands, just that watch. Every few minutes she lifted her wrist, checked the time, then looked straight ahead. She hadn't spoken to me since boarding. No greeting, no nod, nothing. I didn't mind. I planned to sleep the whole way. About 15 minutes after takeoff, the seatbelt sign turned off. A few people stood up. The low hum of conversation started and then quickly died down again. That's when she leaned toward me. "Did they say what time we land?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, almost strained. I think around 2, I replied. "Maybe a little after," she nodded, eyes drifting back to her watch. "That's late," she said. "Yeah," I said. "Not too bad, though." She didn't respond. A minute passed. Then she asked, "Have you ever been on a flight that didn't land?" I laughed lightly, thinking it was a joke. "No," I said. "I don't think that's how flights work." She didn't smile. "I was on one," she said. I glanced at her, unsure how to respond. "Emergency landing?" I asked. "No," she said. "It just never arrived." Her fingers tightened around her wrist. I told myself she was tired, maybe anxious, maybe just strange. "Probably just felt like it," I said gently. "Late flights can mess with your head." She looked at me then. Her eyes were red, like she'd been crying for hours. "No," she said quietly. "This one feels the same." Before I could ask what she meant, she turned back to the window. Outside was nothing but darkness. The flight attendants came through with drinks. When they reached our row, the woman ordered nothing. Didn't even look up. I ordered water. As the attendant handed it to me, she glanced at the window seat, then hesitated. "Ma'am," she said, "would you like anything?" The woman didn't respond. The attendant waited a second longer, then moved on. I noticed something then. There was no reflection of her in the window. At first I thought it was the angle, the darkness outside. But when the plane shifted slightly and cabin lights flickered, I still couldn't see her reflection. I told myself I was imagining it. Planes make your brain do weird things. Time passed slowly, too slowly. I checked my phone, no service, still an hour to go. The woman checked her watch again. "This is where it happens," she whispered. "Where what happens?" I asked. She didn't answer. The plane hit turbulence. Not violent, but enough to make the overhead lights rattle softly. A few people stirred. Someone cursed under their breath. The woman didn't move. Her eyes stayed locked forward. Suddenly, the seatbelt sign came back on. The captain's voice crackled over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some unexpected conditions. Please remain seated." That was it. No explanation. The woman's breathing became shallow. "They didn't say anything last time either," she said. "Last time when?" I asked. She finally turned to face me fully. "Before the lights went out," she said. As if on cue, the cabin lights dimmed further, not fully off, just lower, emergency low. A few people looked around, confused. The engines sounded different now. Not louder, just strained. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. "This is probably normal," I said, more to myself than her. She shook her head. "It's never normal when they stop talking to you." Minutes passed. No announcements. The turbulence stopped completely. The plane felt like it was gliding, unnaturally smooth, too smooth. I looked around. Most passengers were awake now, whispering, checking phones, watching the flight attendants who were standing near the galley, speaking in low, tense voices. The woman checked her watch again. "We should have landed," she said. I looked at my phone. We were past the scheduled landing time, 10 minutes, then 15, no descent, no change in engine sound. I leaned forward and tried to catch a flight attendant's attention. Before I could, the woman grabbed my arm. Her grip was ice cold. "Don't," she said. "They won't answer." "Why?" I asked. "Because they already did," she replied. Her fingers loosened. I pulled my arm back slowly. "What are you talking about?" I asked. She swallowed hard. "I was on this flight before," she said. "Same time, same seats. Same delay." "That's impossible," I said. She nodded. "That's what I told myself too." She looked around the cabin. "Some of them were here last time," she said. I recognized their faces. I followed her gaze. Everyone looked like strangers to me. Suddenly the captain's voice came on again. Short, flat, "Prepare for landing." No location, no runway, no time estimate. The plane began to descend. Relief washed over me. Real, physical relief. I looked at the woman, ready to say something, anything. Her seat was empty. The middle seat was still empty. The window seat was empty. No coat, no bag, no sign she'd ever been there. My heart slammed against my ribs. I looked down. Her seatbelt was buckled. The indentation in the seat cushion was still warm. The plane landed hard, rough. The wheels screamed against the runway. Applause broke out, nervous, scattered. We taxied in silence. When the doors opened, everyone rushed to get off. I stayed seated, staring at the empty window seat. As I stood, I noticed something tucked into the seat pocket, a boarding pass. The name was faded. The date wasn't today's. It was from 6 years ago. Same flight number, same seat. The gate agent didn't want to look at it. She took it anyway. "That passenger never made it to the destination," she said quietly. "What do you mean?" I asked. She met my eyes. "That flight was diverted," she said. "Mechanical failure." "Everyone survived, right?" I asked. She hesitated. "Everyone who disembarked," she said. "I don't take late-night flights anymore. And I never sit next to the window. Because sometimes the passenger beside you isn't trying to get home. They're just trying to land." The man never took his seat. That was the first strange thing. This was a full flight. Late evening, packed aisle to aisle. People were already annoyed. Overhead bins slammed shut, flight attendants rushing, that tired airport tension hanging in the air. Everyone had sat down. Everyone except him. He stood in the aisle near row 14, holding his boarding pass like he wasn't sure where he belonged. At first I thought he was just confused. Some people panic on planes, some freeze when they can't find their row. But he wasn't looking around. He was staring straight ahead. I was seated 3 rows behind him, aisle seat. From where I sat, I could see the back of his head clearly. He didn't move. The flight attendant approached him with a polite smile. "Sir, can I help you find your seat?" He didn't respond. She repeated herself a little louder, nothing. Passengers started shifting, sighing, whispering. Someone muttered, "Come on, man." The attendant gently touched his arm. That's when he turned his head. Slowly, not startled, not confused, just slow. I saw his face for a moment. He looked blank. Not angry, not scared, just empty. "My seat is taken," he said calmly. The attendant glanced at his boarding pass. "Sir, you're assigned to 14C. That's where I'm standing," he replied. She smiled awkwardly. "No, sir, that's the aisle. Your seat is right here," she pointed. He looked down, then shook his head. "No," he said. "Someone's already there." She looked at the seat. It was empty. "I assure you, sir, it's open," she said. He stared at the seat for a long time, then said, "He doesn't want me to sit." The attendant paused. "Who doesn't?" she asked. "The man," he said. "The one who was here first." A silence fell over the nearby rows. People were listening now. The attendant's tone changed, calmer, controlled. "Sir, please take your seat so we can depart." He didn't argue. He simply said, "If I sit, he'll notice me." That was when the second attendant arrived. They spoke quietly with him for a moment. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught fragments. "Delay the flight. Medical issue. Security." Finally, the man stepped into his seat. 14C, the flight attendants looked relieved and moved on. But the moment he sat down, he leaned forward sharply like he'd just realized something awful. He grabbed the armrests. His breathing became shallow. "He's awake now," he whispered. The man next to him leaned away. I tried not to stare. The seatbelt sign turned on. The plane pushed back. Everything felt off. I noticed the man in 14C never looked at anyone directly. His eyes stayed fixed on the seat in front of him as if someone were sitting there. As we took off, he pressed himself back, trying to make space. The plane leveled out. The cabin settled. I hoped that was the end of it. It wasn't. About 30 minutes into the flight, the man raised his hand. A flight attendant came over. "Yes, sir." "He keeps leaning back," the man said. She looked confused. "Who?" "The man in front of me," he said. "He keeps leaning into my space." She glanced at the empty seat. "Sir, there's no one there." The man's voice trembled. "He doesn't like being ignored." The attendant crouched slightly, lowering her voice. "Are you feeling okay?" He nodded quickly. I was until he started talking again. The attendant straightened. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to stay calm. We're monitoring the situation." She walked away. The man didn't relax. He started whispering under his breath, over and over. "I didn't mean to take it. I didn't know it was yours." I couldn't hear anything else. The man beside him asked quietly, "Are you all right?" The whispering stopped. The man turned his head slowly. "You shouldn't talk to me," he said. The other passenger froze. "Why?" he asked. "Because he listens when people notice me." A few rows ahead, someone laughed nervously. Someone else stood up to use the restroom. The man in 14C flinched hard as they passed. "He's walking through him," he said. The flight attendants spoke again near the galley. One of them glanced back repeatedly. Then the captain's voice came over the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We are handling a situation." That made things worse. The man started shaking. "He's angry now," he said. "I sat where I shouldn't have." Two flight attendants approached him. "Sir," one said gently, "we need you to come with us to the back of the plane." He looked terrified. "I can't move," he said. "He won't let me." They helped him stand. As soon as he stepped into the aisle, he screamed. A raw, sudden sound. "He grabbed me," he shouted. Passengers gasped. One attendant nearly dropped his arm. "There's nothing there," she said firmly. "He's holding my shoulder," the man cried. "He doesn't want me to leave." The attendants guided him quickly toward the back. The moment he was out of sight, the cabin felt lighter. Like pressure lifting. The flight continued in tense silence. No one spoke much after that. We landed early. Emergency vehicles waited near the gate. As we disembarked, I looked toward the back of the plane. The man wasn't there. I asked the flight attendant quietly what happened. She hesitated. "He wasn't on the manifest," she said. "What do you mean?" I asked. "No record," she said. "No boarding scan, no seat assignment." My stomach dropped. "But I saw his boarding pass." She shook her head. "There was no boarding pass," she said. "He was already on the plane when we boarded." I left the airport shaken. Weeks later, curiosity got the better of me. I searched the flight number. 6 months earlier, another flight on the same route had been diverted. A man had stood up mid-flight, screaming about someone sitting in his seat. He had a heart attack in the aisle. Row 14C, they say planes don't remember. But I don't believe that anymore. Some seats don't forget who belonged to them first. I didn't notice him when I first sat down. That's what still bothers me the most. This was a red-eye flight, past midnight, long haul. Most passengers looked exhausted before we even took off. Lights dimmed early. The cabin had that quiet, heavy feeling where everyone just wanted to sleep and wake up somewhere else. I was assigned a window seat near the back. Row 28, middle section. Not great, not terrible. The aisle seat was empty when I arrived. The middle seat was empty too. I remember thinking I got lucky. I stowed my bag, sat down, and put my headphones on. People were still boarding. The aisle was busy. I looked out the window, watching ground crew move slowly under the orange lights. That's when someone sat down next to me. I didn't look right away. I just felt the movement, the slight shift of the row, the armrest dipping, normal stuff. I assumed someone had taken the middle seat. I adjusted my headphones and stared forward. Then I noticed something strange. The armrest between us was still up. I glanced sideways. The middle seat was empty. No bag, no jacket, nothing. But the pressure was still there. Like someone was sitting close enough to make the space feel smaller. I frowned and shifted toward the window. The pressure shifted with me. That's when I turned fully. The aisle seat was occupied now. By a man I didn't remember seeing bored. He was thin, maybe late 30s, dressed plainly, dark jacket. No headphones, no phone, just sitting there, hands folded in his lap. He was facing straight ahead, not moving. I assumed I just hadn't noticed him earlier. People miss things when they're tired. Still, something felt off. He hadn't put anything in the overhead bin. No backpack under the seat. Nothing. The plane pushed back. Safety demo played. I stole another glance. He hadn't buckled his seatbelt. The sign was on. I leaned slightly away from him, pretending to adjust my jacket. He didn't smell bad. Didn't smell like anything at all. When we took off, his body didn't react. No bracing. No grip on the armrests. Just still. Once we were in the air, the cabin lights dimmed further. Most people closed their eyes. I tried to sleep. I couldn't. I kept feeling aware of him, not watching me, just there. After maybe 40 minutes, I heard him speak. Very quietly. I think I'm in the wrong seat. I paused my music. I'm sorry, I said. He didn't turn his head. I don't think this was mine, he said. I checked my boarding pass. This is 28A, I said. Window, he nodded slightly. I know, he said. That's why it's strange. I waited for him to explain. He didn't. You can check your boarding pass, I suggested. He looked down at his lap. I don't have it anymore. That happens, I said. Maybe it's the aisle seat next row. He shook his head slowly. No, he said. I was already sitting when everyone came in. That didn't make sense. I think you should ask a flight attendant, I said. He finally turned his head toward me. His eyes were tired, not crazy, just worn. They already checked, he said. They said this seat was empty. A chill crept up my back. I'm sitting here, he added. I laughed lightly, trying to ease the moment. Well, yeah. I can see that. He looked down again. They couldn't, he said. Before I could ask what he meant, a flight attendant walked past. Excuse me, I said quickly. Sorry to bother you, she stopped. Yes, the man next to me thinks he's in the wrong seat, I said. She looked at me. Then at the empty aisle seat. Sir, she said gently, is someone bothering you? I stared at her. He's right here, I said. She followed my gaze. There's no one there, she said. The words didn't register at first. What do you mean? I asked. She smiled politely. That seat is empty, she said. You're seated alone. My heart started pounding. I looked again. The man was still there, still sitting calmly, still facing forward. He spoke softly. That's what they said before. The attendant's smile faded slightly. Sir, are you feeling okay? She asked. Yes, I said quickly. I mean no, he's sitting right there. She shook her head. There's no passenger assigned to that seat, she said. We double-checked after takeoff. The man beside me let out a slow breath. I told you, he said. The attendant asked me to come speak with her in the aisle. I stood up. As I did, the pressure lifted. The seat felt empty. I looked down. Nothing. The man was gone. My knees almost gave out. What's going on? I whispered. She guided me a few steps away. Sir, she said calmly, are you under a lot of stress? I was just talking to him, I said. He was right there. She glanced back at the row. Do you want to move seats? She asked. Yes, I said immediately. She relocated me a few rows forward. I sat between two sleeping passengers. I tried to calm myself. Maybe I was overtired. Maybe I imagined it. But as I settled in, I noticed something else. The aisle seat in row 28 was now occupied by the same man, same posture, same stillness. I froze. I stared down the aisle. He wasn't looking at me, but I knew he hadn't moved. I pressed the call button. Another flight attendant came. There's a man in that seat, I said, pointing. Row 28 aisle. She looked. There's no one there, she said again. I moved, I said. He moved too. Her expression tightened. She spoke quietly into her intercom. Two attendants walked toward row 28. They stood there for a long moment. One of them touched the armrest. Nothing. They returned. There is no passenger in that seat, one said. We're going to ask you to rest. The man spoke again, louder this time. "I don't like moving," he said. Several passengers stirred. I felt my stomach drop. "He's talking," I said. "You heard that?" The attendants looked at each other. "We heard nothing," one said. The captain's voice came over the speakers shortly after. The rest of the flight passed in tense silence. I never saw the man again. But when we landed, as people stood to get their bags, I glanced back one last time. Row 28. A single seatbelt was buckled, the aisle seat, no one in it. I asked the gate agent about the flight afterward. She checked the manifest. "There was no one assigned to that seat," she said. But what?" I asked. She hesitated. "That seat was involved in an incident last year," she said. "What kind?" "A passenger collapsed during turbulence," she said. "Died before landing." "Which seat?" I asked, though I already knew. "Row 28, aisle." She closed the file. "Sometimes people feel things when they fly tired," she said. "But I don't think tiredness buckles seat belts. And I don't think empty seats complain when you take them. Some seats remember who never got up."